I'm not a TV presenter or interviewer or anything like this. So it's
Well,
it's always that awkward having to intro. Have you gotten better at
yeah.
it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the only way to get better at it is to just keep doing it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
I mean,
It always just
I'm
feels
not
weird.
that good at it either, but yeah, I know it's
Yeah.
awkward, but
Yeah. So I've got Megan with me, which is amazing. You say Megan or Megan in Canada?
Megan
Megan, the American Megan Murphy, because
is
we say
so is
Megan.
me. Oh, okay. So is Megan like a UK and Australia thing?
Yeah, I
Okay,
think
because
so.
I do
Yeah.
sometimes people have called me Megan, but I sort of just thought Megan was like an alternate way of pronouncing Megan, but I didn't realize that was specific to the UK. Like I know a
Yeah.
Megan in Australia, so I was like
Yeah, we say
maybe.
Megan in Australia. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
So,
I'm not offended if somebody calls me Megan, but my name is Megan. I mean,
yeah.
it doesn't upset
Uh,
me or put me into like some kind of trauma cycle or anything like that. Miss Megan.
well, my name, I'm used to just responding to whatever approximates. Yeah, I respond to just noises that start with T. It's just, yeah.
People
But,
often people call me Morgan accidentally all the time, which I find sort
ah,
of odd. I have a friend named Morgan, and we often like when we were younger and we'd be out, people seemed not to be able to understand when we'd be like, "I'm Megan," and she'd be like, "I'm Morgan," and they'd be like, "What?" And I was like, what? These are two separate names. Like, it's not that
yeah, yeah,
complicated. And Megan is like a very common name. But yeah,
yeah.
people will email me back and be like, "Thanks for getting in touch, Morgan." I'm like, my name is right
Yeah.
here. But anyway, whatever. It
No,
doesn't
I
offend
think
me. I just find it amusing, I suppose.
I think like anything, it's one of those things where you realize, I think having a weird name, you realize that those that take the time to learn it are actually, you get what I'm saying? Like, I just find that it's interesting anyway.
I mean,
It's
I
almost
guess
dismissive, but
I find it funny because there's a lot of like offense taken by certain people. Like some people
yeah,
get really, really mad when you like mispronounce your name, and I just don't relate
yeah.
to that. I'm like, who? It's not an insult. They just don't
It's
know
a
how to
yeah.
pronounce your name.
Yeah, and I often joke that I'm like part of I'm marginalized. I'm diacritically challenged. So, because I've got an accent over my
Diacritically?
name.
What is
Diacritic. That's the accent.
diacritic? Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
So I'm diacritically
Okay, got it.
oppressed. Yeah, yeah. So
Right,
anyway,
right.
that was the I've
You're a
checked off the
survivor.
name. Yes, I am. It's very hard being me as a non-binary diacritic. I've been joking with this thing at the moment, right? I'm not non-binary.
Well, we kind of
My
all
joke,
are non-binary in some
we
ways.
are
I'm always
exactly.
like, well, either we're all non-binary or none of us are not. Like
Yeah.
the way that people explain what non-binary means, I'm like, well, then I guess I'm non-binary too, and therefore nobody's non-binary because it's just it's not a thing. You're not
Well,
special or
also,
different from anyone else.
well, absolutely. And according to the clinical guidelines in Australia, I don't know if it's the same in Canada, but non-binary, you're in the trans umbrella. So
Yeah.
I've been going through this malicious compliance logic where it's like, well, as a gender critical feminist or radical feminist or just a feminist, I'm non-binary, therefore all the TERFs are trans. If you're using the sort of weird twisted logic.
Okay. I think I got
No.
lost in there, but I believe you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
No,
don't
no.
get it.
If you obey the
It's like too
rules,
meta.
yeah. If you take the rules as they apply, right? Which is that we don't believe in gender
Right.
necessarily.
Well, I
We
believe in
believe
gender.
that
I
they're
believe in
separate.
gender roles. I just
Yes.
don't believe that gender is like, I don't believe that those categories are like completely immutable. Like, I don't believe that all
No.
women are all of these feminine stereotypes and all men are all of these masculine stereotypes. I believe like there's obviously individuals with individual personalities and likes and dislikes, and some of the things that I like would be maybe categorized as masculine, other things feminine. Same with my behaviors. Like it's more messy than I guess the trans activists would allow for, who apparently
Yeah.
are arguing, and people would have allowed for in the 50s, for example.
Well,
But
this is what I find weird is when did this happen? I mean, we know like people are tracking the scholarship and they're tracking, it was always the crazies in the comments section or on Tumblr and all of those sorts of things. But it's, I sit here every day and I've been confused by this for years and I still remain confused as to how this became, and I'm sort of asking this openly and rhetorically,
sorry,
but
my dog
how
is
this
whining in the
happened.
background. Sorry,
That's
sorry.
fine.
Emma, stop whining, please.
Hi,
Sorry.
doggy.
How did
It's
this
all good.
happen?
Yeah,
Okay.
because because I discovered Feminist Current just by clicking like sort of 4 or 5 years ago, right? 4 years ago. And I didn't even know what a TERF was. I didn't know anything. Someone called me a TERF and I went, what's a TERF?
Oh, you didn't know what it was
and
until somebody called you one.
I didn't know. No,
Okay.
I didn't know. I thought I was just a feminist. And then it's just crazy. I sit there and it's been years now. And now I feel like one of the veterans, but it's very weird. I just would, curious to know how this happened for you. Was it something you always knew?
That like what this gender
That
identity
people conflated
craze,
gender and
or
sex?
oh, okay. I mean, yeah, I think I've always known that people conflated gender and sex. I think that it happened in the 80s because I think there's some legal document in the US. It may have even been Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but I don't want to misattribute. Um, it was like the men, I think, were upset about the use of the term sex because sex also means intercourse. And so they started using gender instead of sex. And then it just got all
Yeah.
conflated and confused. And then, of course, I mean, what's funny is that, and yeah, nobody, and because now on forums and documents, people also use it interchangeably. Like like I'll go to you go to like massage therapy and you fill out a form and it'll say, what's your gender? And I'm just like immediately like pissed off and triggered because I'm like,
Yeah, I know.
sucks. My gender isn't female. Like you want me to put feminine down? Like fuck you. Like I'm not going to.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
I'm feminine. But yeah, like I think that people just it's used interchangeably, and then the trans activism thing really messed things up because it's funny because trans activists will often insist to me, oh, you're conflating sex and gender, and I'm like, no, you're conflating sex and gender. All I've been doing for the past however many years is trying to explain what the difference is between sex and gender and why feminists are, opposed to the notion of gender identity. Like, because it demands that we identify with gender roles that many feminists don't identify with. And this is, of course, something feminists have been fighting against since there was a feminist movement to say, no, we aren't just this. Like women aren't all delicate and emotional and irrational. We're not all supposed to be like pretty little things to look at. We aren't unfit for political life or public life. And we aren't better suited to the home necessarily. I mean, there's some ways, of course, where like women are, of course, better suited for mothering, for example.
Well,
like that's evolution. There's not a ton that we can do about that. But still, so we've been pushing back against all this stuff, and now all of a sudden it's like, oh well, if you identify with femininity, if you identify with these gender roles attached to femininity, then you're a cis woman. And if you don't, then you're like a trans man or you're non-binary, all these things. Whereas we worked so hard feminists, the feminists that were around before I was even born. I'm not saying me specifically. I didn't do all this work myself. But, worked so hard to be like, no, like a woman doesn't have to be feminine. Like we're female and we can enjoy traditionally masculine things, and vice versa. Like there can be boys and men who don't fit the stereotypes attached to masculinity and maybe like some feminine things. And then, now all of a sudden, the supposedly most progressive movement in the world is telling us the opposite thing, and then refusing to acknowledge that, female is biology and a material reality and not something that you can just imagine away or subvert or identify your way out of. Like, it's just postmodernism to the extreme.
Yeah. Yeah. Did it come out of universities, or is it something where, because I've been doing it, like, I think we talked a little bit about this, but what happened in France, to sort of undermine real socialism and real Marxist critique and all those sorts of things, that postmodernism was given gasoline in America and various places in order to basically get rid of the communists. And I find that really interesting, because did you study gender studies at university, or was it women's studies? When I
first started in college, which would have probably, like, when I first took my first women's studies class, it was called women's studies at the college that I went to, which would have been like, I don't know, maybe 1999 or 2000 or something like that. And then as I continued my degree, eventually the department switched over to become gender, sexuality, and women's studies. And that was around the same time.
When was that?
It happened kind of all at once. All these universities across Canada all kind of just started switching over, kind of like around like 2009, 2010.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so it was later, because I did political science, and we had women's studies, but it was women's studies up until mid-2000s, I think.
Yeah.
If not, it was around the same time. And then I don't know the history, because I'm not from that department. I was from the sort of political science. So a lot of this old feminist stuff, it was just obvious. Like this radfem, I had to that's why when I ask you this rhetorical question, somewhat rhetorical and confused question, I sit there and I go, how is this not obvious to people? Because I don't understand where this came from. Obviously I know this. I know that postmodernism obviously is to blame, but how people started to deny what I thought was settled and what was was consensus, right?
Well, and part
I'm
of
falling
it
over
was
my words today.
All good. I understand where you're going, I think.
I'm a bit nervous. I'm fangirling a bit. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I didn't notice. I'm
relax.
just a regular person like everybody else, obviously.
I know. I don't get starstruck, but for some reason I'm nervous today. It's very weird. Anyway.
Well, part of it. So yeah, part of it's like postmodernism. It was also like, it was a backlash against second wave feminism and against radical feminism. So those departments, were enmeshed in third wave feminism, and that backlash against the second wave and against radical feminism was already happening in a number of ways. We were supposed to look for agency, not victimhood. So, and that was applied to things like the sex industry. So we weren't supposed to just, and to, women living in third world countries, like other cultures that were, where women were experiencing much more oppression than women in the West were experiencing, like Saudi Arabia and places like that. We weren't supposed to talk about those cultures as any more oppressed than Western cultures. We were supposed to pretend that everything was just as bad across the board, because it was kind of condescending to talk about things in that way. Same thing with, prostitution and pornography. Like, no, all those women are empowered, and they have agency and choice. They're not victims of anything, because to talk about victimization and oppression and marginalization in that particular way was somehow the insult. So it was though you could subvert reality through language and through just, changing your lens, changing the way you discuss these things, regardless of what the material reality was. So that was going on. Radical feminism and second wave feminism was really not very present within the curriculum. It was more, as now we might call them, or now we would call them, intersectional feminism. It was third
Yeah.
wave feminism. It was feminists who were doing academic work more like in the 90s. And so I think that the idea that women's studies should be specific to women was treated as old-fashioned. Feminism and women's studies should be about men also, so that's part of the gender thing. Like, oh, it's about gender. Like, we should be talking about men, and we should be talking about trans, and we should talk about everybody. Like, the idea that we would have like a woman-centered anything wasn't seen as like the modern way.
And well, I suppose that part of that is, I don't know whether you had this in universities in Canada. I imagine it's the same. Do you have, but if you exclude 50% of the population, I think degrees became a sort of an industry rather than something that you did as part of education. And I don't know whether, sorry, I'm stammering today. I'm saying the market, right? When universities privatised, I know here, like I was an activist sort of in the 90s when we still had sort of publicly funded university education, or very heavily subsidised. Privatising universities and putting in like that capitalist incentive within the university system, obviously there's an incentive to expand an entire department to people to do sociology and gender studies and all of these people. It's like you sort of open up a whole new market, right? So you can't really look at this without looking at capitalism's forces as well, right?
Right, yeah, exactly. I mean, things have changed over so much so that the student is sort of looked at as a customer and treated as a customer.
Yeah.
Which has also impacted the quality of education, I think, because I think now students have this idea that the customer is always right. They've also taken on that customer role, and because profs are evaluated by students, and those evaluations have an impact on whether or not they're rehired or whether or not they get tenure, things like that. They're punished if they give students bad grades.
They're kids.
So there's incentive. There's incentive to sort of bump up grades even where they don't deserve it, and to sort of placate these students. The students in the universities are the bosses really nowadays. Like, and I think, those jobs are so unstable now. There's so few tenure track positions. Instructors are therefore paid a lot less, and they aren't guaranteed a career anymore. And it's hard enough to get a job in academia as it is, never mind a permanent tenure track position. So I think that instructors and profs are really vulnerable also. And I think the universities feel like they have to compete for students because they need the money. And so you're right. Like that's impacted the way universities and academia functions as well.
So it was like that. So is it paid in university in Canada, or do you have a sort of a mixed system like us, where it's we get loans from the government and then pay it back once we're earning an income? So
we also get loans from the government and have to pay back.
Okay,
it's not like the U.S.
Not like the American system. Yeah.
Well, where there's the private universities that cost an exorbitant amount of money, but we do have to pay. Like the universities that are subsidized by the government still cost like an insane amount of money. Like, you can't afford to go to university unless you're paying your way, or you're getting a massive amount of student loans. And even if you're getting loans, you still when I was in university, I still had to work the whole time and get loans to go full time. Like, unless you go part time, and I did go part time for a really long time so that I could continue to work full time. But it's impossible to get your full degree and go part time. The universities aren't set up to allow you to do that. So at some point, I had to quit and work a bunch of part time jobs, do like research positions, and so on and so forth. So not only are you working, but you're also going into debt. It's really expensive, despite the fact that it's not as bad as the system is in the U.S. And there are these like private Ivy League schools, for example, like that's regulated.
Yeah. And I think that we're all downwind from that system, even if we're separate. I think it's so influential, like a lot of the stuff that I've been looking at, like the postmodernism's influence, like just downwind. Like that's why I'm so interested in all of this, the US culture wars, even though they're a bit detached from the Australian experience. Everything is so downwind from the United States in terms of like universities and culture and all of these things. It's really fascinating to me that people think that the US culture wars aren't relevant to Canadians or to the UK or Australia or anybody else in the world.
Well, I wish they
I'm a
were
bit
less
sick of them,
relevant
but
because it's, you know,
yeah,
it's ridiculous. Like it's like
yeah,
Canadians especially are so
I know.
enamored with the US that they pretend that we share the same history and politics as they do,
Yeah,
you know, like it's
which we
like
don't.
we're having, you know, Black Lives Matter protests in Vancouver and it's like these are not our
Yeah,
issues. These are not our demographics. This is not the history of
yeah,
racism in Vancouver and BC and Canada is quite different than the history of racism in the US. And you know, there's certainly issues, especially with regard to Indigenous people in Canada, Asian
yeah,
people, South Asian people. But I mean, I found it almost amusing that there's like it's like what you're having a
yeah,
Black Lives Matter protest. I mean, you have bigger problems than this, like Jesus. And it's just because they're seeing it on their social media feeds. That's it, right? It's
yeah.
like they're people we've
Well, yeah,
adopted these politics because of what social media
it's
has
all
fed us, and it's all American politics. And even the Americans are adopting politics based on what's fed to them on social media, right? Like it's not even
yeah.
they don't even fully understand their activism in politics. They're just like, I'm seeing this all over my Twitter feed, so I guess this is what we're doing now. You know,
This is
that's part of what's
consensus. Yeah,
happened with the trans activism too. It's like, oh, now we're
yeah.
saying trans women are women. This I'm just seeing this over and over and over again. This is what the algorithm is telling me, although they don't realize it's the algorithm. They're like, oh, everybody I know says this. Everyone thinks this now. It's like, no, this is what the robots are telling you. Like,
Yeah.
good for
Yeah.
you.
Well, this is
Really radical politics you've got there that Twitter is like
yeah.
feeding you and brainwashing you into believing.
Yeah, well, this is actually the book that I'm writing at the moment has a chapter called America Online, and I've just finished it. It's chapter 3, so it's not out yet. But I don't know how long you've been on the internet, but that invasion of the sort of AOL.com users onto Usenet. And there was some I've been through several different culture wars on the internet over the years, but America Online around 9/11, where they kind of lost their minds a bit and all of that sort of stuff. I don't know whether you sort of participated in online stuff that early.
Not
When did you get on the
really.
internet?
I
Oh, okay.
mean, so that was, how old was I then? I guess I must have been 20 or 21 or something like that. So
Yeah.
I really wasn't
I think we're
online.
about the same age. Yeah.
Like I
No,
probably
okay.
like had an email address, but I wasn't using
Yeah.
the internet.
Okay, yeah, because I was like an old school nerd. So, but we saw this happen where the Americans and the Canadians and the Australians and the UK, there used to be this, there's this weird affinity, these bubbles, and then it would be like sort of us against the Americans online, having these like, because an American would land onto an internet forum and just start shouting about the flag and all this sort of nationalist stuff. And so this is not a new phenomenon. Is what I'm trying to say. It's just that
Right. Yeah, of course.
like Americans behaving badly online and dominating discourse. I think that the tech companies are very much. It's just a new hegemonic force. It's just I think we're all participating in an American playground, if that
Yeah.
makes sense, like culturally and in terms of the rules. Like I resent the fact, like the C word, right? I don't know how Canadians feel about that word, but Americans hate
Oh,
it.
yeah.
The word
I
cunt, right?
used
We
to
use it
find
all the
it really
time, right?
offending. I used to find it really
Yeah.
offensive, but then when I realized that Australians and the people in the UK used it totally different, I was
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, whatever. Like I didn't
Yeah.
get it. Like I didn't even
Exactly.
know that until I was an adult, and then I'm seeing like British women using it, and I was like,
Mm.
what? And I was like, oh, this is a totally different thing. Like. But yeah,
Yeah.
like it's like this thing where you get to there's this universal application where feminists announce
Mm.
cunt is an offensive word, nobody can say it, and it's like that's just because you're totally you only know your own culture, and
Yeah, that's not what
Americans are
Jermaine Greer
so
said.
self-absorbed that
Yes. Yeah.
they can't even imagine that things would be different anywhere else. And yeah, and Canadians especially have always sort of like tried to adopt Americanisms to a certain extent, but also, like we also like spend a lot of time dissing America and acting like we're so much
Yeah.
better than America. And, we are better than
Well, you
America in
are.
a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Well, not in terms of free speech. Like there's some things that America actually is better at, but yeah, in many ways we're much better off, certainly in terms of things like healthcare and our social safety nets and the labor movement. Unions are stronger here. Unions have hardly any
Yeah.
power in the U.S. And we don't have this major problem with the religious right. We don't have this major gun problem. We don't have this major problem with police brutality. There's lots of ways that things are different here, of course, but yeah, I mean, in other ways we act like things are the same when we start taking on their issues and their political discourse.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that's just crept. Again, maybe just because as an early adopter, I've seen this, which is that over time, the internet was supposed to be free. It was supposed to be sort of, you're able to have free conversations and back and forth and all that stuff. And there's never been a time when American corporate interests didn't crash the party. And I see this as just another example of that, which is that's why I think, how is your life without Twitter? Is it over? Is it not over?
It's had a really big impact on my work and my ability to make a living. So it really has had a negative impact, and it's frustrating to me when people pretend that's not the case. And I wish it weren't the case. I wish that we weren't dependent on social media, but we are. And especially, I'm an independent. I've always been an independent, like I've always, I'm an independent writer. Feminist Current is, an independent website. We're not we don't have institutional support. I don't work for a company. It's just me. Like my entire ability to make a living is all dependent on me. It's all donation based, essentially. Like it's all through Patreon. It's all, whether or not my audience supports me, that's the only way I can make money. Like I don't even have ad revenue. You know what I mean? Like I don't have ads on the website. It's all just people donating through Patreon or through the website and things like that. And, you can't generate that kind of income unless you're on social media and you have a following. So I had a really big audience and a big following and a lot of support via Twitter. And then that all disappears and I kind of have to start over from ground up. And I think people don't get that. Like, I think people just assume, like, I don't know, that I have some other job or that there's some somebody funding me, or they don't realize how little writing pays. Like people don't realize that writing an article really does not pay very much.
No, it doesn't.
So
yeah, and also I think most people think that, this is because I work in digital, but people think that people who use social media for business or for organic traffic or for traffic generation, all that sort of stuff, right? I've had to explain to people so many times over the years, I don't use Facebook like my cousin uses Facebook. I use Facebook for an audience and for ideas and for building influence and all those sorts of things. The number of times over the years that I've had people ring up and go, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, I just wrote something grumpy." It's rhetoric, it's fine. That kind of people don't really get that personal versus professional thing with social media. So most people with their if they say they had a Twitter account and they're just being a dickhead jack off on there or whatever, they don't realize that that there's a business purpose and that's strategic, and that to lose that actually does cost you a fair amount of traffic if you're doing it well.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Like it's yeah that they
Yeah.
think, oh, like so you can't use Twitter, like that they think of it as like, oh, you can't play your games anymore, and it's like, well,
Yeah.
this is, I mean, Twitter is specific to,
Yeah.
Twitter is where journalism happens, right? So Twitter is where all the
Exactly.
journalists are and the writers are. Like different
Yeah.
social media platforms are better for different forms of like business. I don't think of myself as a business, but like, you know, like
Mm.
as a writer, as an editor, as somebody who runs a website, as somebody who, you know, produces content, who's, you know, done journalism, things like that, like you really do have to be on Twitter so that you can make connections, so that you can get interviewees, so that you can access sources, so that you can access editors, so that your work is visible, so that you can share your work, so that you can recruit writers. Like this is what you do. You can't do that on other platforms. It doesn't work like that for Facebook and
No.
Instagram.
Yeah, yeah, and exactly, and like Twitter's got that discoverability to it that I think, yeah. But so, are you finding it difficult to promote Feminist Current, or has it reached a point where you've kind of built a community?
Feminist Current already
But
has an audience because we've been around since 2012, so we already have a pretty
exactly.
strong audience, but it's hard for me to promote my work separate from Feminist Current. So, you know, like I'm doing
Yeah.
another podcast on top of that and another YouTube channel, and you know, if I like, I write for other publications, so it's very
Yeah.
difficult for me to promote that stuff and get that kind of thing going,
Yeah.
which is challenging. You know, like this is a lot of the reason that, you know, people will ask writers to write an article. So somebody contacts me and they're like, hey Megan, can you write an article about this? You know, a lot of that has to do with the fact that I'm known and that I have an audience, and there's an
Yeah.
expectation that you share it on social media because they're dependent on clicks. You know,
Yeah.
that's how things work nowadays. So it has an impact on me in that, in those terms as well. Like it's like I can't get as many clicks, and therefore my value as a writer goes down, right? I mean, I'm
Yes.
not I'm lucky to have value as a writer. People know who I am. I had a sort of fairly established career before I got kicked off, but I'm certainly less visible now. So, you
Yeah.
know, people kind of forget about you when you're not like out there online, right?
Oh, yeah. It's so easy to just, if it's not right in front of you, to forget. Like I just forget. I forget to check in on people all the time. It's like, it's
Totally.
just
Like if
crazy.
people go off
So it
Facebook,
is
I
like a
feel
death.
like I kind of forget about them. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
eventually I
Yeah.
might be like, yeah, whatever happened to that person, you know? But like
That
poof,
I
like you're
know
not
that it.
seeing it on your feed, right?
Well, well, I had a friend, sadly, very sadly, who passed away 3 months before I knew about it. You'd think that of all of the notifications, right? It was an acquaintance from years ago, and you'd think of they had memorialized the account. You'd think that they would notify people of like one of the most important things ever, which was that a friend. I was so devastated to find out that she'd gone. Like it was just crazy how
Yeah, I'm really frustrated
we're
by what
so
I see in my algorithm. Like my Facebook
yeah.
algorithm, like what Facebook thinks I want to see is not what I want to see.
Yeah.
Like I don't see anything from my friends hardly. I just see the same old thing over and over again from people I don't even know. I'm like, stop showing me
Yeah.
the same article over, like what Facebook has
Yeah.
decided I want is not what I want, and I can't change it no matter what I do. Like I try really hard to like click like on other things, so to like switch it
Yeah.
up and to like not click like on these things, so I don't want to keep seeing them, or like I don't want to keep seeing this random person who I don't know in my feed over and over and over again, but I can't change it. It's
Yeah.
really irritating.
Well, they do. I've read a lot of the research, internal research, but also I've tested this myself, right? Which is they want you arguing on there, right? They could actually I bet they're monitoring everything that you say, all of the words that you're using. They know when you're fighting with friends and family. They know all of these things, right? The algorithms know and can sense sentiment, and they could actually just say, no, don't see this front of center the next morning in your feed. But they're very much trying to generate the negative emotions and those sorts of things within the platform. So it's probably like any time you see anything to do with culture wars, it'll be front and center because they want you engaged in fighting, right?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I don't know if you watched
Yeah.
The Social Dilemma. Everybody else did. I
Yeah.
watched it twice. And yeah, it's like these people, these companies, these corporations love rage. They love
Yeah.
conflict. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
why was like RIP JK Rowling trending? It's like, because
Yeah.
this is good for business. Like, all they want is
Yeah.
advertisers to give them money. So they want people to be on that, they want people to stay on the app so that they see ads. Like, that's it. They just want to keep people on here. So if they can generate
Yeah.
controversy, you know, polarization is great. All this fighting is great. All this hating is great. Like, to pretend like they want to like stop hate on Twitter or Facebook is a
No, they
joke.
don't.
Like, no,
Yeah.
it's great for them. They make money off that.
Yeah, they don't. And also, I mean, I've been in those rooms. I remember saying this a decade ago. I've been in conferences with these engineers where I've said this is unethical. This will end badly. This is not healthy for humanity. And they kind of pat you again, this whole misogynistic pat on the head. Oh, that, you know, little social scientist in a room of engineers. And I said, this is bad. It's not going to end well. It's not going to end well. And they just went, oh, and then they're on the social dilemma acting surprised, like nobody said it. It's like, oh, plenty of people said it. But yeah, so, but yeah, I was going to say something. I can't remember. But I wanted, the one thing I wanted to actually talk about was because what I thought, that leads me back to how I sort of really 4 years ago found my way to feminist current, and it was sort of in the shade of Caitlyn Jenner. And the first thing that made me kind of go, this isn't what, you know, like just that, you know, that whole the whole Caitlyn Jenner Woman of the Year thing. Taking in all this information. I used to read Jezebel a lot, right? I can't believe I used to read that shit, but I was just busy. Like I always considered that the definition of feminism had been sorted. It was resolved. We were focused on violence and, you know, women's bodies, you know, all of those pillars that we talk about, right? Which is, you know, men who take from women and take from our bodies, commodification, those sorts of things. Okay, that's settled. That's defined, right? Feminism is defined. Susan Faludi wrote Backlash, and I went, oh yeah, let's watch for that backlash, shall we? That was my understanding. But then I moved on and went into the business world, right? And then it was just like I wasn't really paying attention to the political debates that were going on online in detail. And so my real exposure to it was through like the advertising world and all that sort of stuff. But then seeing Caitlyn Jenner win Women of the Year, then seeing Jezebel's comments just go a bit mental at one point. They just suddenly again, all of this happened at the same time, around the same time, where the comments section just took a shift towards this real intersectionality, sort of going off the rails. Like, I understood that they meant intersectional because I knew what it meant. I didn't realize that people were using the word, sorry, I'm not using my words correctly, that the word intersectional meant something else to other people. I thought that these definitions had been agreed upon within the feminist movement. Was that something that was your experience, or is it always something that has been hotly contested and debated? I know that the third wave, second wave tension's always been there, but I thought that we'd agreed on these things.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought intersectionality was just about the fact that, you know, women who are racialized or women who are working class have different experiences than women who are white or who are middle or upper class, which seemed to me obvious. Like, of course, all like people will pretend to criticize those of us who criticize intersectionality as it's used today by saying, like, all women don't have the same experiences. We all have different experiences. There isn't any universal experience. There's no universal womanhood. And it's like, nobody actually thinks that. Like, nobody believes that, like, a middle-class woman, like, white woman living in Canada is having the same experience as, like, a poor woman living in India in prostitution or something like that. Like, come on. But... I mean, but yeah, they now, you know, intersectionality now just means like everything. Like, it means there's no female experience, there's no commonality. And that came out of the third wave. And I was taught that in university too. Like, this was all stuff that was going on when I was doing women's/gender studies in universities. It's like, nobody has a universal experience. We're all different. We're all having individual experiences. And yeah, of course, now when somebody throws intersectionality at you, it means, you know, you should be prioritizing people who identify as trans, particularly trans women, even better if it's a trans woman of color. I mean, that checks so many more boxes. Like it means that we have to support Black Lives Matter. It means we're supposed to be thinking about men of color as well. And it's like there's nothing wrong with thinking about, like, I mean, men of color struggle with all sorts of things. Like poor men struggle with all sorts of things. Like we don't have to pretend that that's not true or ignore it. But in as far as talking about feminism, like feminism is just a women's movement. Like feminism is just about fighting for women's rights, and that's fine. It doesn't mean like ignore all these other issues. It means this isn't specifically an issue for feminism, like, or it doesn't have to be an issue for feminism. Like, and you know, like I've started saying, you know, like I don't even know that I want to use the word feminism anymore because nobody knows what it means. It's supposed to mean all these other things. I just want to talk about women's rights, I guess. Like I just need to be really specific about what it is that I'm talking about now. Because if you're out at a bar or party and you're like I would never announce that I was a feminist to anybody, because what they would assume on that basis is not going to be true. Like people are going to assume, oh, you must be really into like sex worker rights or something like that, right? Or like,
that's what. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go for it.
I was going to say that was the confusion for me. I was always just a openly, happily, proud feminist. And it was never something that I really, I just was a fan of Germaine Greer, a fan of, you know, all of the stuff and all of the second wave stuff. I loved Naomi Wolf's Beauty Myth. I thought that was an interesting book and it was an interesting take. And, you know, there were some aspects to third wave that I thought, okay, well, you know, I don't know about the Spice Girls was a bit of a turning point, I think, for all of us. But where you started to see that commercialization of girl power, I think is, you know, where we started to see that. But when you're talking about the definition of intersectionality and that sort of stuff, right, it's like they're missing the most obvious point, which is class analysis, right? And I think because I was more into the sort of political policy economic side of things, I knew that those markers contributed to socioeconomic status, right? I didn't, they were just, so again, coming from a different angle, which is not even just purely from women's rights, but just from political and policy, which is listening to various groups and various, in the consultation phase and all those sorts of things, right? What you do is the intersectionality is a good tool to remind you that other people don't share your experience when you're forming policy, all those sorts of things. And that was, I don't understand how I can't help but think that this hasn't come out of the universities necessarily. Like this is one of the things with James Lindsay that frustrates me. I think they give a lot of this stuff too much credit in terms of it being scholarship rather than just being the internet comments coming to life.
Yeah, well, it's both.
I think it's borrowed. Yeah, I think it's borrowed from it, but I think that it's a mutation.
Yeah, like, I mean, a lot of these ideas did come out of academia and, you know, things that Judith Butler was writing about and this idea that, you know, like I remember, you know, we talked so much about subversion, like how can you subvert heterosexuality or like queer heterosexuality? Those are kind of all academic words, which, you know, is this idea that it's like, oh, I don't know, maybe you're not just like a boring old heterosexual if you're in a polyamorous relationship or you're not having penetrative sex, or like, I guess now it would be like if you both identify as lesbians, even though one of you is a man, like, you know, like, or, you know, maybe I made out with a girl once, so I'm bisexual. So now, like, I'm a queer, like, you know what I mean? Like all this nonsense where, again, like if you just change the language or you change how you think about something or you change how you identify with something, that actually changes the material reality, and it doesn't. And I do think that a lot of that came out of academia. But yeah, I mean, now it's definitely that, you know, young women and men are learning all of their politics from the internet, and they're not reading any books. So they don't know anything about feminist history or women's history. They haven't read feminist theory, which is fine. You don't have to read feminist theory, but like we should all know about history. And especially if we're going to be, you know, talking about feminism and women's rights, we really should be paying attention to women's history, how we got to where we are today. You know, what women had to fight for. And if that were true, and if people actually understood women's history and understood what happened in first wave feminism, second wave feminism, so on and
Yeah.
so forth, I don't think that we'd be dealing with this garbage around like, oh, those like privileged, like white middle class, like suffragettes. It's like, no, they fought for you to be a person, for you to count as an actual person and to be able to participate in public life. Like, shut up. You're so ignorant.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so it's both things, but
Yeah. Because I've talked to a
certainly,
few academics and they can still defend it. That's the thing, right? Because they know that it has a place. Like this stuff, their ideas in a philosophy department, we shouldn't kill those departments or kill that thought necessarily. Because I think most of the people who are, well, that I know anyway, that are in these fields, that's I guess my frustration with some of this is people want to kill the gender studies department and think that that's a win. Like it's still a valid school of thought, I believe, right? I think that it's still just a philosophy department. I don't know whether you agree with that, but I'm saying I feel like I know that the humanities are under attack here, like and in the US and those sorts of things, and it just seems like a lot of the it seems like it's succeeded in completely undermining the humanities and arts as a discipline completely. Are there elements like, is there any validity to what Judith Butler had to say in a controlled burn situation?
I mean, I guess you're partly right that they're sort of just philosophy departments, but I mean, at this point, I sort of feel like these departments are too far gone. You know,
Yeah,
they've erased everything of worth, and they're just caught
yeah,
up in their own need to perpetuate their department and to legitimize their discipline because it's really silly and it's irrelevant to most people and it doesn't make sense to most people, so they just need to kind of keep pumping out stuff, and it's like the emperor has no clothes kind of thing where they all just repeat
yeah.
this jargon back and forth to one another,
Oh,
and pretend that they're saying something of worth or pretend that they're saying something intelligent and they're not, and nobody will admit it because then they're out of a job or
yeah.
their career disappears. So I don't know. I
Most
don't think
definitely.
I'd be too
Yeah,
upset if the gender studies department like was gone.
yeah. Oh,
But I
I couldn't
mean,
do it.
it's
I
not. We're
enrolled
not
in something.
talking about
Oh,
women's history in those departments anymore. If we were, then
well, that's the
like,
thing. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the thing. I don't think it because I think that like nobody has actually really engaged with the literature. Like this is, like I said, it's more of a mutation. Like I've worked out, like I did this big crazy board. You probably, like when this first happened, I've just tried to diagnose all of this stuff, like the internet stuff, the political stuff, the economic stuff, the women's studies stuff. This crosses so many different disciplines that in order to, like if someone asks you a question such as, what's happening with J.K. Rowling, right? I'm sure that you kind of go, you talk about it a lot, but a lot of us are involved in it. But for your everyday person, right, you need to be able to, there's such a baseline of complex knowledge. You need to understand democracy. You need to understand like the history of not just the history of feminism, but you need to understand how politics works, what the law works, what the role of the judiciary is in government, what the balance of powers. There's all these principles that are just being undermined by something like self-ID, right?
yeah. I mean, and
That in order to
people have.
explain it, people,
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say people have asked me like what's going on with J.K. Rowling.
yeah,
So, and I have to be like, okay, how do I explain this?
where do I
Because
start?
it's
Yeah.
hard if you're not like enmeshed in it, and it sounds crazy to people. Like, because if you tell them literally what happened, they don't believe you because they're like, well, she must have done something wrong because why do all these people hate her if this is all that she said? And I'm like,
Yeah.
crazy,
And then you
right?
get out your
Like,
flow chart. Yeah. And that's like, I swear, I've got a mind map because I was getting to a point where I just couldn't actually, I can barely speak about it now because there's just so many, my brain goes in 12 different directions every time I try to talk about something.
Yeah.
And then I realized once I put it into a mind map, it's a complex, it actually looks like a legit crazy board. Right. And it's like, okay, so you've got the culture wars over here, you've got this over here, you've got, tech company power and regulation over here, you've got all these, like, there's all these buckets that are all specialist disciplines. And it's almost like it's this weird magic eye painting that's like an impenetrable issue that people don't understand because it's just, how something as simple as men aren't women became so incredibly complex. When I said earlier that when I'm trying to articulate what the fuck happened, that's the question that I always say. How did something that was so obvious become so complex?
Yeah. I know.
You get what I'm saying? Like,
Nuts.
it's just, it's funny. Anyway, I
Yeah,
just
and
thought it was
I
just an
do
interesting.
think, like, I mean, I sort of had this epiphany after watching The Social Dilemma because I've spent many years trying to figure out how this happened so quickly,
Mm,
like all of a sudden this trans activism had taken
mm,
hold, and this notion that trans women are women and anyone who says any different is a hateful bigot, and to even ask
mm,
questions about those ideas makes you a hateful bigot, and you have to be canceled and ostracized, and it's okay to verbally
mm,
abuse you, or maybe it's okay to physically abuse you too, right? Like, violence is
mm-hmm,
justified because anybody who asks questions about, like, how is a trans woman a woman, you're a Nazi and you're a fascist, and it's okay to be violent
mm-hmm.
against those people. But yeah, like, I mean, I realized that I was like, oh, this has so much to do with our social media feeds
Yeah.
and what
They're
we're
just
what we're
manufactured
seeing
cults.
over and over and over and over again. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And also the fact that there's money in this. Like, I think that we can't
totally.
ignore. It was really weird, actually. Some guy showed up on my YouTube channel and asked me why I thought that there was money in trans rights. And I
Yeah.
went, and I took the time to explain. I said, well, in America, it's probably hundreds of thousands of dollars, lifetime pharmaceutical patient, right? Not to
Well,
mention
and
like fast
it's
fashion,
how
the
all
fashion
these
industry, all of these things, right?
these charities and these NGOs are
Yeah.
now they and places like transition houses, right, and shelters, like, in
Mm,
order to get their grant money, they have to sign on to this stuff, right? So
yeah.
no longer
Mm-hmm.
are you have to, otherwise you lose your funding and then people lose their jobs.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, uh, do you believe, I still, I know you don't, but do you believe most people don't believe this stuff? They're just going along
Oh
with it.
yeah, no. I think most people are just either going along with it, not saying anything, or they're lying, or they're just unaware that this is a debate. I
Mm,
think the majority of people in the world have no idea that there is
yeah.
this notion that, if you identify as a trans woman, you're literally female, or that people literally believe you can change sex at all, never
Mm,
mind through just announcing it. Um,
mm,
and then, yeah, the people who are going along with it online, I think, are, maybe they think they're trying to be nice. A lot of them maybe
mm,
believe that there's this marginalized community of trans people are being murdered all over the place, which they're not.
yeah.
Just again, because this is just
Mm.
they're
But
seeing
they
it
are
over
fed
and over and over in
propaganda.
their feed. So they'll see,
Mm,
like, black trans women are being killed every day. And it's like, that's not even possible. There's not enough black trans women in this country for them to
mm,
be killed every day. But certainly that's just not what's going on. It's like, women are being killed every day. Men are being killed every day. Trans people are like
yeah.
this tiny minority of, like, it's practically non-existent. It's not a
Mm,
real problem, and yet it's centered so much in progressive political discourse,
mm,
because of social media, like, sort of warping what's true and what's relevant, or what should be relevant. Um,
mm. And there's big money
and
in it too. It's just in the targeted ads as well. And it's a whole, like, it's just a whole big racket of just non-profit organizations. Like, they funnel like donations through digital agencies who sort of, disperse that money and distribute that money across ad accounts. So Facebook get the money from the ads, right, for all the paid and boosted promotions. The not-for-profits get, all of their like paid for positions that, all of those people, they get their volunteers and all those people, they recruit people, right? And the political parties are able to, get money. There's like I don't know if you saw some stats, but dark money in the US election has gone up to something like thousands and thousands of percent since social media arrived, right? Something like $300 million in this election alone is run on Facebook ads that aren't traceable. It's
hmm,
just crazy, So it's done with the yeah. Anyway, paying attention to the digital agencies is really important because I think that's the thing that people don't really pay attention to is these radicalization funnels. They're basically marketing funnels that they use
Well, I think people don't
with young kids.
realize how much it impacts them. I don't think that they realize like how much of their politics and their beliefs and their emotions and their lives are shaped by these social media platforms. You know, they're
Well,
dictating the terms of speech, right? Like they're dictating what we're allowed to say, what politics we're allowed to have, what kind of news we're allowed to access and read, what kind of information we see. You know, and
yeah,
people
well,
think, oh, like, yeah, like again, like it's like, oh, you got banned from Twitter. Like, oh, well, it's just Twitter. And it's like, yeah, but this has major implications for everybody else because they're going to be like,
yeah,
oh, Megan got banned for Twitter for referring to a man as he. I guess we're not allowed to do that anymore. I'm not going to do it either. And then all of a sudden, language and discourse and ideology and reality and laws and policies are
yep,
changing and people are just accepting it because they're like, oh, this is the norm, I guess. Not like, oh, this
yeah.
corporation actually shouldn't be allowed to dictate what we're allowed to say and how we're allowed to discuss these matters.
Are you familiar with the Organizer's Handbook?
Nope.
It's the snowflake model of organizing, which is what all of these like
I
the
don't know what that is.
non-profits like BLM and Unicorn Riot and all that cluster of like not-for-profits in America. They are all trained by this guy out of Harvard, and it's basically a radicalization model online that's used. It's basically a playbook, right? That any organization can use to recruit, and it uses cult tactics. Oh, actually, I should send it to you. It's really interesting. But basically, it's basically the same strategies as ISIS. Online radicalization as the same tactics. If you compare them side by side, they use the exact same tactics and use it so they've basically injected MLM with politics and political organizing, decentralized leadership, and basically a handbook for anybody who wants to promote anything to anyone ever and radicalize these poor kids. I've actually got an experiment running at the moment that I can't talk about, but yeah, it's just there's actually a handbook for this thing that radicalizes people into a specific ideology or gets them on the streets or so basically basically using the same tactics as ISIS, and nobody seems to point that out, right? It's just bizarre.
Do you mean like this handbook is like it's one specific
How to
handbook and
organize.
all these organizations
It's a specific
are using how to organize?
recruitment. Yep. So how to organize. So
Who wrote
recruitment
this?
tactics. The granddaddy of it is Marshall Gantz at Harvard. I was aware of the Organizer's Handbook early on because I did policy, and it's something that I think has just mutated. It's one of those things, like in marketing where someone gives a handbook or a guide to something and then everyone uses it for good and bad purposes and then it gets ruined. I think so it might not be, I'm not prone to conspiracies, but it's an actual model, right? That came out of Harvard for public policy.
Right.
And, but there's a digital version of that, right? Which is run through like agencies like, they call themselves another acronym. Like how cynical is that? But they're a digital agency that they run all of the advertising platform, all of the Facebook ads, all of that sort of stuff through all of the Facebook for like Democratic political candidates. Yeah, it's like big data, big money. And like they plug into all these 501c around them. And it's basically like, I don't want to make claims, but it's Jack giving $10 million to that guy is a political donation that is usually laundered through other means. So I would actually argue that the agencies are laundering through Facebook, but for political donations. But that sounds crazy. But we're in crazy town, so nothing's crazy anymore. But no, yeah. So there's actually it's actually literally a handbook that tells an unwitting activist how they can recruit, like an MLM, like like with Amway and those sorts of things, right? Recruit your friends, contact your friends, get them on Messenger, all of that sort of stuff. It's crazy. I'm running some experiments at the moment where I get to see what a 13-year-old girl newly on Facebook sees. And I've sort of built out a profile, so I'll report back on that one, I think.
Right.
But
Yeah, that would be interesting.
yeah, so I'm researching behind the scenes on this stuff. But anyway, sorry, I monologued. But do you think that this is just now a resurgence that we're going to get back to feminism, not real feminism? Do you think it's the test we needed?
Uh, well, we've been sort of forced to get back to feminism in some ways.
Mm,
So, in some ways, I thought it was sort of a good thing that all of this happened. I mean, I don't think it's a good thing that all of this happened, but a good aspect of what's happened is I think that many of us have been sort of forced to get back to the roots of feminism and to sort of remind
mm,
ourselves, like, what this is about, like sex-based rights,
mm,
women's rights, what those are, why they matter, because I think that a lot of people took it for granted.
yeah.
We have gotten really far in feminism. Feminism is one of the most successful political movements ever, if not the most successful political movement
Mm,
ever. A lot changed in a relatively short period of time, within a century, right? Um,
mm,
and and now all of a sudden we have to go back to the beginning. So it's a real reminder that we can just lose this all, and that we have to keep fighting about it, and that we need to keep educating ourselves, that we need
yeah.
women's history, that we
Well, that's
can't just
something.
lose all these books that have been just, yeah,
Mm,
like I said, like erased from the academic, like from the canon, right? And
mm,
it just
that's
becomes
crazy.
kind of folklore, and it's twisted around online through this like game of broken telephone that we play online. And
Mm,
it's really important that we know our history, and that we actually go to the original sources, and we don't just listen to what our friends say or what they post online. Or and you know and
mm.
we can't trust the media. The really unfortunate
No,
thing is that we can't even trust what mainstream media or liberal media is telling us. And you see
that was the eye
that.
opener for me.
Yeah, totally. It was a real big eye
Were
opener
you
for
let
me.
down?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I thought that there were media sources that I could trust. In Canada, I've been listening to the CBC, our public broadcaster, since I was a kid, every day,
Mm,
since I was a kid,
yeah.
and I thought this was a neutral, trustworthy, good media source, and only realized as a result of all this gender identity stuff that they weren't neutral at all, that they were completely biased,
Yeah.
and that they were just going to cover things in ways that would placate whoever it is that's in charge over at the CBC now. They're not representative of
Mm,
Canadians at all. They're representing a tiny minority of Canadians and feeding them, I
mm,
guess, what they want to hear. And that's, of
yeah.
course, is similar in many other media platforms and publications in
Mm,
the US, in Canada.
mm. Well, our public broadcaster recently referred to women as vulva owners, so that was really nice.
Right. Yeah, and
It
like, I
was
mean,
lovely.
you see, like, it was like, you were reading about the backlash to J.K. Rowling's new book, and what
Yeah.
these publications are saying the book was about wasn't even true. I read a whole bunch of different sources wanting to, cover it on my end and my work on my YouTube channel. And like, I'm like, okay, well, here's a review. This is what the review said. And then it's like, no, that's not even true.
It's,
Like, this
yeah.
was not a book about a transvestite serial killer. Like, this was a book that, I guess, there was one. I mean, I haven't read the book yet, so
I
I
think it was
can't say,
online.
but
Yeah.
man, the confidence with which thousands of people who hadn't read the book were going to come out and say, this is a transphobic book. She wrote an entire book about a transvestite serial killer, when it wasn't even true. And they're not even going to bother looking at the original source. Like, it's just like the things people print,
Meanwhile,
like these
misgendering Robert Galbraith.
right.
You always try to have a bit of fun. I kept pointing out, stop misgendering Robert, everybody. Yeah, yeah. But that's the thing. Does anybody actually read the material anymore? That's actually a thing where I sit there and I go, like, I read these books and I did not come to any of these conclusions. And are people just, is that the problem? Is that everybody is just building their entire knowledge and opinions, everything that they want to say off of a tweet, or because somebody said it or they heard it on TV? Is this just an
Yeah, I
extent
mean,
is
it
the
seems like nobody goes to the original source anymore. Like I said, like when people talk about women's history and the feminist movement, they're not talking about something that they actually read in a book. They're talking about
no.
something that, somebody, it's all second or third or fourth hand information. And yeah, and all these publications, media sources will just reference and quote other publications and other media sources, which also are not going to the original source, and you just get like dozens and dozens of articles essentially saying the same thing, and then realizing, oh, this isn't even true, and you didn't even do any reporting. Like, what are you doing? Like,
Well,
nobody bothered calling the person that they're talking about, like, I started
yeah.
realizing it was happening to me, right? Like these media outlets would be reporting on my events and what I was saying or might be saying at my events, and they wouldn't even call me. And that's just like against basic journalistic
But isn't
standards.
that not, yeah. You learn about primary, secondary sources like year one of journalism, don't you? And journalism ethics. It's like, it's a full unit in a degree
I
for a
didn't do a
journalist, right?
BA in journalism. I started doing a master's degree in journalism, but I actually dropped out because I got too busy and couldn't afford to finish. But
Yeah.
so I did my
Yeah.
BA in women's studies or gender sexuality and women's studies.
Okay.
So I don't know what they
But
teach
even
in
you
first year.
learned
But yeah, of course, yeah, you learn all those
the
basics
primary
in journalism
sources.
school. And yes, I learned all those
This is
things in
like
journalism school.
eighth grade stuff. Yeah, yeah. And that's what I find just perplexing is that I think that, again, another shift, which was that idea that there's some such thing as a primary source and a reliable source, and you
Well, they
shouldn't
just don't
really
care. No
be.
one's holding them accountable. Like they can just
Yeah,
say
yeah,
whatever they want, and people want the outrage, and the social media companies want that outrage.
yeah.
So it's
They
more
don't care if it's
beneficial to
true.
them to just provoke rather than to,
Yeah.
take the time to actually read the thing or go to the original source and look and see what's true or take like nuance. Nuance isn't going to travel as far. Nuance is not as exciting as like these, hyperbolic
Yeah.
statements.
No, and that's something that frustrated me in the business, which is this idea that everything, like the elevator pitch and those sorts of ideas, right? And it's like, well, if what we're talking about is complex, I need the time to be able to form my thoughts, especially if they're, complicated. Some things just can't be summed up in 30 seconds or less. Some things are actually just complicated, and and if there's a slogan attached to it, there's usually some sort of motive or something sinister underneath it. Like the willingness to, Animal Farm is one of my favorite books, but I always thought it was a exaggeration or a satire of I didn't realize people were so willing, just how susceptible people are to slogans and sloganeering. And I think that's the thing that's really bothered me over the years, is because I tend to think people are good and smart. And every so often I get that kick in the guts and reminded that
I don't think people are smart, but I do think most people are good.
Yes, yes.
I think most
agree.
people are probably actually not very good critical thinkers, and people kind of don't really self-reflect a lot or reflect on the world around them all that much. But I do think that in general, people's intentions are good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I suppose, and also that the dopamine rush you get from a retweet of
Yeah, it's like a drug. It's
offensive
no
hot
different than
take.
any other addiction.
Yeah, yeah. It's just really
I mean,
frustrating.
people are
but,
motivated. People are totally motivated by that dopamine hit and that ego boost and the like and the retweet. And it's really scary because people make a lot of decisions on that basis. They make decisions about what, to do for work, what they say online, what they share, what political positions to espouse, what not to say. And yeah, and I mean, we all are susceptible to that. It's how our brains are wired.
We're not above it.
No, but
no.
I mean, it's really important that people think about why they're sharing and why they're tweeting this and why they're posting this, and to think about their motivations and to remind themselves of the fact that this is like, it functions in the same way as slot machines do, right? Like, or even like, drugs. Like, it's not this neutral platform, and it's not a platform that's for us. It's not a tool for us. It's just a tool for this corporation to profit.
Yeah, and it is very easy. I'm sure that you've been through the same thing I have, which was that bouncing out of the left and entertaining all of the sort of culture war right for a while and getting, not knowing what your politics are. I mean, I've always been pretty secure in my politics, but, that temptation to sort of jump out of the frying pan into the fire over one issue and sort of abandon, like where do you fit in the political spectrum and all of that sort of journey. I know you've gone through that too, right? Learning to be a bit more open-minded and less adversarial
I
towards
mean, yeah, I
conservatives and
was
all that
always
sort
a
of stuff.
leftist, right? I mean, my dad was a Marxist. I grew up in a household, we were a union family. And yeah, I thought that the right was bad. I thought conservative people were bad. Like, and not only did I think that they were wrong, I thought that they were, motivated by evil, kind of, which is, I didn't realize that that was just,
That's
it's
interesting.
not true. Like, and I mean, it's
No.
really useful because it's like, so the people who are saying that I'm bad or evil, or who talk about the right wing or conservatives as though they're bad and evil, as though anything the right says or the left does or says is inherently good, and anything that a right wing person or conservative person says is inherently bad, instead of considering actually the ideas and the ideology and whether or not these ideas are coherent.
Yeah.
That's, I've been there. Like, I get it. Like, I get wanting to virtue signal to your lefty friends and having the most
Yeah.
lefty radical opinion and going around like telling everybody they're not left enough and they're not feminist enough, and all these people doing it to me. I'm like, yeah, I get it. Like, I've been through all this and just came out the other end, and what you're doing is stupid and obvious to me, but I guess like you're just gonna have to figure this out on your own time if you ever get there, which hopefully you do. But people act like they're
Yeah.
educating me. I'm like, no, I just went through all this and came out the other end.
I think I've gotten better at like only speaking opinions when I actually can back them up and when I actually know the material. Like I can talk about Marxism because I know Marx, right? I can talk about Marxist analysis. I can talk about things. I think a lot of people. I think a lot of people pretend to have read things they haven't actually read, and
Totally.
they speak on things that they're not. So I think that's one thing that I've gotten better at is only talking about what I know really well. I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah.
I
I
used to
mean,
just
you
have an
shouldn't. I
opinion
don't
on
think that.
everything all of the time.
Yeah, I mean, I was a
Yeah.
bit like that too. I mean, I don't think I was terrible, but yeah, I mean, I think for me more it was that I just had all my opinions and my analysis down pat. So it's like, this is the leftist analysis, this is the feminist analysis. I'm so familiar with this, I can just easily apply it to everything, and I did. But you lose the critical thinking factor, and because you're not being
Yeah.
exposed to other ideas that might be better than your ideas, and you're not being challenged, it's just, lazy thinking. And so you have to kind of block
Yeah.
out any challenges and be like, oh well, you don't agree with me on this, you must be bad, because I'm not
Yeah.
equipped with the tools to respond to you, because I'm not used to being challenged in this way. I don't engage with right-wing people, I don't engage with conservative people, I don't engage with libertarians, or I engage with libertarians to say they're stupid and wrong. Like,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
think this
Don't
is true.
engage
I'm
with
just
them.
saying this was my
No,
perspective
no.
in the
I'm
past.
saying it's just funny because the next thing is I'm not going to talk to them because they're bigots. It's like, isn't that this closed-mindedness is kind of the definition of being a bigot, right?
Well, and feminists do that. Like, it's like, I don't have to argue with men. I don't have to explain things to you. Go educate yourself. Feminists do it just as much as anyone does. And it's like,
Yeah, I
no,
used to do
actually,
that
you
a lot.
should explain. Yeah, I've done that before too. Like,
Yeah.
no, you should explain your perspective. Like, you should have to defend
Yeah.
yourself or be able to defend yourself. Like, otherwise, maybe your opinion is not so good.
Well, the irony of this is that going back to sort of radfem roots has made me a better wife. I know that sounds very weird, but I know but it's made me a better person. I think in terms of not, the whole man hating thing, that whole third way, like the whole emotional labor, and I shouldn't have to explain to you. You should read my mind, all of that sort of stuff. I think it makes it very hard. I had to really confront how I treated men in my
Yeah.
life as well, I think, and that was something that I reflected on, which I find
Yeah, well,
interesting
seeing
and
men as the
ironic.
enemy is not very helpful. Men are not all the
Exactly.
enemy. Some men are the enemy.
No.
if they're assholes, but some women are assholes. Like, it's not
Yes.
all men are
Yes.
like this, all women are like
I'm a
this.
pretty big asshole. Yeah. But yeah, no, it's funny. But yeah, I think that's. I don't really. I was going to bring up the why, like the Mr. JY thing, but I think we're all so sick of it that
I know, I'm so
it's
tired of
just
talking about him. Like, to me, I'm
the
just like,
unflushable
man, this is
turd.
just like a crazy person. Like, it's like
Yeah,
all the focus on it's like we don't like this is just
yeah,
an insane person. Like, this is
yeah,
not, it's just is a joke. Like, I don't want to put energy into it. You know what I mean?
yeah. Where are you putting your energy more now in just fighting the good fight? Are you still? How's the case against Twitter going? Okay, am I able to ask? Is it
Oh, it's in
no
the works
comment
still.
pending?
I mean,
Still working?
it's just
Okay.
so slow moving. It's just like
Yeah,
moving through the system. Like, we appealed, we,
yeah,
are waiting for a response. They keep postponing, yada yada yada.
yeah.
But yeah, it's still in the works, and I'm hoping that we win because they need to be held accountable. Like,
Yeah, they
they
do.
need to be regulated. They need to be They can't just be
Yeah.
holding themselves accountable. Like, that's insane. They have way too much power for
No.
that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, trust
so
us. We're trying our best. Yeah. I said nobody. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, these days I'm just trying to focus on like the YouTube channel, show, podcast. I'm always trying to
Yes,
write
the same
more. I
drugs.
never have time. Yeah, the same drugs. I'm interested in exploring new ideas, and I'm interested in talking about different things and different people than the things that I've been focusing on over the past decade, essentially. And
Yeah.
obviously I'm pretty heavily focused on the gender identity issue. But yeah, I just like thinking about things and exploring ideas and trying to really get to
Yeah.
the truth at the end of the day.
Do you think that we're, in light of the GRA that's stuff that's come overnight, or the last couple of days with the GRA being sort of dead in the water, right? The GRA reform, sorry. Do you think that that's going to have implications for C16, or do you think that that's going to just stay that way forever? Do you think that
I don't
the
know.
UK might? Are
I
you
mean,
cautiously optimistic that sanity is going to prevail,
it's just
or are we
hard
too
to
far
roll
gone?
back legislation once it's implemented. I mean,
Yeah,
I hope so, but it's going to take us
yeah,
doing something in Canada. It's going to take us really
yeah,
fighting, and we have not been fighting hard enough. Women here failed to, really organize around that when we sort of had a chance to, and now it's legislation, and there are people who are
yeah,
pushing back, and there are women who are organizing now, which is good, but it's going to be hard to roll that back. And it's especially going to be hard to roll that back if you refuse to talk to anybody who's not like part of the NDP. Like, the left is
yeah,
never going to get
yeah,
on board with us over here ever. The NDP is never gonna come over to our side and support us. They're too far gone. The conservatives are sort of probably our only chance at repealing that legislation. So it's all just like such a tough situation to be in, especially if you refuse to engage with conservatives.
yeah. Well, that's the thing. That's another thing that I'm seeing that fracture happen, which I find frustrating because again, maybe it's just I've never seen the Conservatives as evil. I suppose that's just different. Different experiences lead you to different politics. Like that's just always been my view. So, but that especially in the UK, like with Kelly and people like that, where they seem to come under fire a lot for sort of any means necessary. Whoever will help, whoever will sort of ally with us to get this stuff sorted. It seems to be unacceptable to a number of feminists. The division and the sort of it's just the purity stuff frustrates me as well
Oh
because
yeah.
it's like
It's totally unproductive. It's like women have always
yeah,
lobbied whoever they needed to lobby and worked with whoever
yeah.
they needed to work with to get stuff done. That's how you get stuff done.
Well, like with the prohibition movement, you knew about that. With feminists were the people who allied with the conservative prohibitionists to get alcohol banned because of domestic violence, because it was actually something that was a shared interest. Like it's not a new phenomenon to join forces for different reasons because you care about a specific thing, right? That's what I find really odd. But I've never really understood girl dynamics. So, speaking of gender,
I've never really fit the girl dynamics thing either.
no.
Like, I don't know how to play this game, nor do
No,
I have
I
the
don't.
energy
I don't
to.
understand. That's why we need to. That's why we have to have science and logic and those things. There has to be some like neutral place in which you can share like understanding and meaning. Like that's why I love your. Defining things is just so important.
Yeah,
And
it
like
is.
anyway. But we've gone for quite a while, so I think I'm going to let you go.
Okay, well, thanks
Thank
for
you for
having me
having
on.
me.
It was really nice to talk to you.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I was a bit nervous today, but
Oh, don't
because I don't know why.
apologize.
It's just yeah. I'm usually all like piss and vinegar, but for some reason today I'm just a bit nervous.
It's all
It's all
just
right.
practice. I don't know how long you've
It
been doing your
is
YouTube channel for, but I
a
mean,
year.
oh,
Yeah,
okay,
but I
yeah.
don't normally interview. I'm good at ranting on my own
Oh,
and
okay.
dealing with
Yeah,
my stuff,
interviewing is
but
a really hard
interviewing,
skill to develop, to be honest, and
yeah,
it takes a lot of practice before you kind of really can get the hang of it. I'm still getting the hang of it.
Yeah, I'm more of a like in my brain crazy board, write an essay type of person. I'm not really a TV camera person, but
I mean,
I
I
do my
didn't think I
best.
was either. Like that's why I sort of
No,
avoided doing YouTube
you
for so
have to
long. I was
be.
like, I don't want to do you like
Yeah.
I don't want to do video. Like I didn't like it. Like or I thought I didn't like it. It's like I'm not good at this, but I actually do really like it. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that I was sort of forced to try.
Yeah, I do enjoy it. I get frustrated that I don't have the skills yet. I want all of the skills yesterday. It's almost like this is a skill in its own right that you can't just learn everything, Taya.
Yeah, if only you were born with all the skills already, that would be so handy.
Yeah, so everyone who's watching, I think, knows who you are, but where can they find you, especially your Patreon? I think that people don't really understand that they owe Megan a huge debt, and if you can flick her some money and support Feminist Current, especially in the current climate, do. I know we're all broke as fuck at the moment, but we'll do the best we can.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, so The Same Drugs is on YouTube, and we're podcasting on all of the podcast platforms like iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, all those there's a million that I can't even remember what they're called. We're on Anchor FM. And my Patreon is linked to on the YouTube and on the podcast. I think it's just like Megan Murphy Patreon.
Yeah, you
Actually,
can just
maybe
search
I'll
for you.
just, yeah, I'm there. I'm just going to look up the link right this second. Yeah, it's patreon.com/Megan Murphy. And then of course, feministcurrent.com.
Awesome.
We also I podcast monthly for feministcurrent.com.
Yeah,
And
great podcast.
oh, thank you. Yeah, I've been doing that
Yeah,
one for a real long time
I'm a
now.
diehard.
Aw, thank you.
Oh, and it's true. I don't show up as much because it's just, like consuming this stuff all of the time and commenting everywhere. And it's like a second job. It really
Oh
is
man, it's
sometimes.
so hard to keep up.
Yeah. And so I sit there and I go, she knows I'm there. So Megan's comment section goes off. The Feminist Current. I was actually, 2014, the TERF article. And then suddenly something will just there'll be a resurgence of a comment. Someone will just land on the article and enter the comments.
Like,
it's just crazy. And it's just, oh my God. But it's actually, if you want some version of the old gender critical subreddit, Feminist Current's comments are fairly close.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I don't use Reddit all that much, but I'm choked.
Oh, it's dead now. Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
But
Anyway, thank you so much. No, thank you. Thank you for coming on.
Of course. Yeah, it was awesome.
And,
It was good to talk to you.
We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, great.
Thanks so much.
Take care. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye. There we go. Thanks, guys. Hit her up. Support Megan. Okay. Bye.